And all of this profit is directly siphoned from public government funds that, instead of going to things that actually benefit and serve the population, like healthcare and education, they go towards building F-35s and war tanks that go on to decimate innocent populations of civilians. We don't choose where our taxes go. Our government does. While the vast majority of us are against war, genocide, and violence, we still pay for it because we weren't truly given a choice. $400 billion. A lot of money, right? $400 billion could pay off the entire nation's medical debts 2 times over. It could feed every single child suffering from food insecurity and place every single unhoused person under a roof. But no. This $400 billion is going straight from our pockets as taxpayers into the deep pockets of for-profit private corporations contracted by the US government's Department of Defense. This video will be the first in my new series called Explaining Scary Systems in Simple Ways. And first on the chopping block is the military-industrial complex. Let's get into it. The term military-industrial complex, which we'll refer to as the MIC, was first used by President Eisenhower in 1961 to describe the growing influence that private companies within the arms industry had on politicians and public policy overall.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
The disastrous rise of misplaced power. Misplaced power happens when the lines between government and corporate interests become so blurred that we can no longer tell the difference. Governments are created to serve the best interests of their constituents. Corporations are created to serve the best interests of themselves through the pursuit of profit. What we have now is a government that has itself turned into a corporation, putting their interests as a corporate entity above the interests of the population that they were created to serve. Think of the MIC as a love triangle. At one point lies the government. At another point lies the private defense industry corporations. We'll get into who they are and what they do in a moment. And at the final point lies war and the threat of war. All of these things are in a codependent relationship. The government relies on the defense industry to bolster its own sense of superiority and protection. The defense industry only exists and survives because of the government's need to feel superior and protected. And both of them rely on war, and war only exists because of them. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So if you're wondering, what's the problem? Why can't we just let them be in this little love triangle? One answer is that we can never achieve an end to global conflict until there stops being extremely powerful players that have vested interests in keeping conflicts going. Another answer is that a government that is serving the interests of corporations cannot at the same time be serving the interests of their constituents. It's not possible. They have to pick one, and they have made their choice. Spoiler alert, it's not us. For fiscal year 2024, the Department of Defense was allocated $824 billion, the highest defense budget of any fiscal year to date, and 2025 is on track to be even higher. Of that $824 billion, over half goes to private defense contractors. That means these are record high amounts of public funds going to private companies. That income tax coming out of our paychecks every 2 weeks, going straight into the pockets of for-profit private companies. Sure, some of our taxes go to the things it's supposed to go to, like roads and public schools, but a whole lot of it is actually going straight to the wealthy shareholders over at Lockheed Martin and Boeing, so they can get even more wealthy. What if the government instead used that money to subsidize free higher education so that working class Americans didn't have to crumble under the burden of $1.7 trillion worth of student debt? Nah, they gotta get those ballistic missiles and surveillance systems. Based on the average share of the military budget obligated to contracts over the last decade, the pending $826 billion bill will likely produce around $450 billion in revenue for military contractors. What's even more concerning is, thanks to the Clinton administration's actions in the 1990s, there is a very small group of corporations that has effectively monopolized the entire defense industry. Long story short, the Clinton administration facilitated a series of mergers that reduced a bunch of competing defense industry companies into just a handful. So now, this small group of companies can pressure the government to pay more and increase their own profit margins because competition is not keeping the prices low. They're the only ones that can provide that service or that product, so they can get away with charging as much as they want. I talk about this more in this video if you want to better understand free market principles and why monopolies are bad. For the defense industry specifically, here's an example of how these companies abuse their monopoly power.
These contractors have a lot of power over the contracts because they're the only ones that can do it.
General Dynamics are the only company that produces the Abrams tank. When the US military wants to buy more Abrams tanks, they don't have to compete that contract. They always give it to General Dynamics. They are the only one. General Dynamics would have no incentive to reduce or contain the cost of the Abrams tank if there's no one competing for that contract.
Based on the 10-year average, 1/6 of the $826 billion Pentagon budget for fiscal year 2024, $140 billion, will go to just 5 companies. Lockheed Martin, RTX Corp, formerly Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman. Over the past decade, 30% of military contract spending went to these 5 companies alone. That's a total of $1.1 trillion from 2013 to 2022. These 5 companies regularly outperform the S&P 500, which is a stock index of 500 leading US corporations. In simple terms, this means that these 5 companies are profiting significantly more than the majority of other major US companies. And all of this profit is directly siphoned from public government funds that, instead of going to things that actually benefit and serve the population, like healthcare and education, they go towards building F-35s and war tanks that go on to decimate innocent populations of civilians. On top of that, the funds will also be used to engorge the wealthy shareholders of these companies so that they can hoard more wealth. Do you see the problem yet? The CEOs of these companies are bringing in upwards of $20 million annually. CEO of Lockheed Martin, James Teichlet, is bringing in $22.8 million. Gregory Hayes of RTX Corp, $21.9 million. Phoebe Novakovic of General Dynamics, $22.5 million. Dave Calhoun, former CEO of Boeing, was bringing in $32.7 million. Kathy Warden of Northrop Grumman bringing in $24.7 million. Their actual salaries are just around $1 to $2 million, which is already a ton of money, but where their real wealth is given seems to be in stock awards. So they earn shares of the company, and as the company grows more wealthy, so do they, because they hold millions of dollars worth of stock in the company. Now, I don't know anything about these people on a personal level. I'm sure they work hard and do their job well, whatever. I just say all this to make the point that the top people at these companies are getting filthy rich from public funds that the government takes from us via income tax. We don't choose where our taxes go. Our government does. They're supposed to send our taxes to places that benefit us and align with our values. It is our money after all. Shouldn't it reflect us in some way? Unfortunately, that's not the case. While the vast majority of us are against war, genocide, and violence, we still pay for it because we weren't truly given a choice. The MIC is sometimes referred to as the military-industrial congressional complex. Adding the congressional in there comes from the fact that the defense industry notoriously pours lots of money into the campaigns of political candidates as a way to make sure their interests will be served by government officials and lawmakers. Basically, if a candidate wants to get elected or re-elected, they need money. Sad but true, thank you capitalism. The more money they have, the better chances they have of winning. In comes the big corporations that have millions of dollars to spare. They pour money into campaigns, the candidate gets elected, and then the candidate goes on to support laws and measures that serve the interests of their wealthy corporate donors and lobbyists. In the 2024 election cycle, Kamala Harris received $3.5 million from the defense industry, and Donald Trump received $1.5 million. House Representative Ken Calvert received $817,000. And Mike Rogers received around $536,000. Senators Roger Wicker, Tim Kaine, and John Tester all received around $400,000. Need I go on? The top 3 contributors were Lockheed Martin, that gave $4.6 million, Northrop Grumman, that gave $3.4 million, and RTX Corp, that gave $2.8 million. On top of that, according to this article by Common Dreams, at least 50 US lawmakers or members of their households are financially invested in companies that make military weapons and equipment, even as these firms receive hundreds of billions of dollars annually from congressionally crafted Pentagon appropriations legislation. In simple terms, this is a blatant conflict of interest. Individuals who have decision-making power over how much government money will be subsidized for private companies should not be allowed to financially benefit from these private companies. Yet here they are doing it. If you need to hear it again in different wording, Craig Holman of Public Citizen says, "It is an obvious conflict of interest when a member of Congress owns significant stock investments in a company and then votes to award the same company lucrative federal contracts." A report by David Moore of Sludge says, "The total value of the federal lawmakers' defense contractors' stock holdings could be as much as $10.9 million. Senator Jerry Moran, a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, holds up to $50,000 worth of Boeing stock. Senator John Hickenlooper holds up to $250,000 worth of RTX stock. It comes as no surprise that these politicians then go on to unequivocally support the growth of the defense industry through supporting and voting for increased military spending. All 13 senators that disclosed military stock holdings voted yes to the National Defense Authorization Act that gave over $800 billion for military spending, as mentioned earlier. Just to reiterate the earlier points, over half of this money goes to the private companies that these senators have stock investments in. Let that sink in. One of the only US politicians with a real backbone and moral compass, Rashida Tlaib, said, "While Americans struggle to access clean water, basic health care, and enough food for their kids, Republicans and corporate Democrats continue to waste our tax dollars on endless war." Tlaib continued, "It's outrageous that every year we spend more on weapons and war than the next 9 countries combined." So while the government is busy increasing military expenditure every single year, Americans are still bearing the weight of rising cost of living without the rising wages to match, bearing the weight of crippling debt from the other corporate capitalist complexes, education, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, you name it. While the government is busy sending billions of dollars worth of weapons to foreign governments so they can massacre innocent people without any repercussions. Approximately 11 million children here in the US are living in poverty, and the amount of people experiencing homelessness is increasing. From 2019 to 2023, the number of people who entered emergency shelter for the first time increased more than 23%. Like I said, we have a government that has turned into a corporation, prioritizing profit and power over the well-being of their constituents. You can build up a defense system, an Iron Dome, ballistic missiles, and fighter jets, but what's going to save you from your society rotting from the inside out? While they perform the "we must defend freedom and democracy at all costs" bit, their own population here at home suffers, and the rest of the world suffers too. How can you be the leader of the free world when you continue to profit off of violent oppression? Continuing to prioritize corporate interests at the expense of a stable population can only end one way: self-destruction. So what can we do? A lot, actually. Figure out who your local representatives are, senators, governors, House representatives, city councilmen, and contact them by email or phone and let them know you do not support them if they continue to be complicit in egregious violence and injustice. Stay up to date and aware of your local election cycles. In all 50 states, there are several other elections we should be voting in on top of the every 4 years presidential election. We are so powerful and capable of making change and being the change we wish to see in the world. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. I hope it was helpful. Please add to the conversation in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear them. If you like conversations like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your post notifications so you can be notified every time I upload in the future. And be sure to check out some of my past uploads. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!